Sharon Mitchell sat alone in her Miami office on the 42nd floor, staring out at Biscayne Bay as the afternoon sun painted the water in shades of copper and gold. In her hands, she held a legal notice that could destroy everything she'd built over 20 years. Her name was being linked to unethical market activity that she did not commit. Industry insiders were already whispering that she was finished. Too cautious, they said. Too replaceable. Too underestimated to matter anymore. Sharon pressed her fingertips against the cool glass window and closed her eyes for just a moment. Behind her, the office was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. What do you do when powerful people bet against you? Not because you're wrong, but because they think you're invisible. That's the question Sharon Mitchell had to answer, and the way she answered it would change everything. But before we dive into how Sharon outsmarted the very people who tried to erase her, let me tell you something important. This isn't just a revenge story. This is a story about preparation, about protection, about self-respect. And most importantly, it's about understanding that smart planning, including the insurance you carry and the systems you build, isn't driven by fear. It's future-driven. So stick with me through this entire journey, because by the end, you're going to see how one woman used patience, ethics, and strategic intelligence to turn the tables on her enemies. And I promise you the lessons Sharon learned can help you protect your own legacy, your business, and your peace of mind. Let's begin. Sharon Mitchell didn't build her career overnight. She was 53 years old, a Black woman in an industry that often overlooked people who looked like her. She'd spent decades working twice as hard for half the recognition, but she never complained. She just kept moving forward. Her investment advisory firm, Mitchell and Associates, wasn't flashy. It didn't make headlines. It didn't promise overnight riches or viral success stories. What it offered was something far more valuable: long-term stability, ethical advice, and genuine care for every client who walked through the door. Sharon believed in protecting people's futures. She wasn't just selling investment strategies, she was selling peace of mind. She'd sit down with clients and talk to them about things most advisors ignored: life insurance to protect their families if something unexpected happens, health insurance to cover preventive care and avoid financial devastation from medical bills, disability insurance to safeguard their earning power if they couldn't work. Most people don't think about protection until it's too late, Sharon would say gently during client meetings. But the smartest investors I know, they plan for the worst and hope for the best. Her clients loved her. They trusted her. They referred to their friends and family to her. But her competitors? They underestimated her. They saw a middle-aged Black woman running a modest firm in Miami, and they assumed she was small-time, forgettable, no threat to the big players. That assumption would cost them dearly. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September. Sharon arrived at her office early, as she always did, carrying her usual cup of Cuban coffee from the cafe downstairs. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and settled into her routine, checking emails, reviewing client portfolios, preparing for the day ahead. Then her phone rang. It was Marcus. No, wait. It was Gerald Hayes, her firm's lead accountant, and his voice was shaking. "Sharon, we have a problem." She set down her coffee. "What kind of problem?" "Someone's been planting false trades in our system, digital footprints that make it look like we've been manipulating the market." Sharon's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, false trades?" Gerald's voice cracked. "I mean, someone's framing us. They've created fake transaction records, backdated them, and made it look like we've been engaging in insider trading and market manipulation. If regulators see this..." Sharon didn't let him finish. She was already moving, pulling up her computer, accessing the firm's internal systems. And there they were. Trades she'd never authorized, transactions she'd never approved. All of them are designed to make her firm look corrupt. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the data. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone wanted to destroy her. Within hours, the damage began to spread. Investors panicked, accounts froze, regulators started circling. Her firm's reputation, built over 2 decades of honest, careful work, was being torn apart in real time. Sharon sat in her office that evening, the city lights glittering outside her window, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. She thought about her clients, the retirees who trusted her with their savings, the young families who relied on her guidance, the small business owners who'd built their futures with her help. She thought about her staff, good people, honest people, people who believed in her, and she thought about herself. For a moment, just a brief, terrible moment, she wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe she was too small, too replaceable, too invisible to fight back. But then she remembered something her grandmother used to tell her when she was a little girl growing up in Liberty City. "Sharon, baby," her grandmother would say, "the world's gonna try to make you feel small. Don't you let it. You get something inside you that doesn't break easily. You hear me? You got iron in your bones." Sharon straightened her shoulders. She wasn't going to panic. She wasn't going to settle. She wasn't going to exit quietly. She was going to fight back, but not in the way they expected. Over the next few days, Sharon did something that confused everyone around her. She stepped back. She stopped making public statements. She stopped defending herself in the media. She let the world think she was crumbling under the pressure. Her business partner, Elaine Rodriguez, was furious. "Sharon, what are you doing?" Elaine demanded during an emergency meeting. "We need to fight this. We need to go public, hold a press conference, tell everyone we're innocent." Sharon shook her head calmly. "Not yet. Not yet. Sharon, they're destroying us. Let them think they are." Elaine stared at her like she'd lost her mind. But Sharon wasn't losing her mind. She was thinking. She'd been in this business long enough to know how these people operated. Whoever was behind this, and she had a pretty good idea who it was, they wanted her to react. They wanted her to panic, to make mistakes, to expose herself. So she did the opposite. She quietly hired the best forensic accountants money could buy. She reached out to her attorney and started building a paper trail. She reviewed every clause in her firm's liability insurance policy, making sure she understood exactly what protections she had in place. She also checked her business interruption insurance, the policy she'd purchased years ago that most people told her was unnecessary. "You're wasting money," one of her old colleagues had said when she bought it. "Nothing's going to shut you down." But Sharon had believed in preparation, and now that preparation was keeping her firm alive during the investigation. She sat alone in her office late one night, reviewing documents, and whispered to herself, "Insurance isn't about fear. It's about dignity during disruption." While Sharon worked behind the scenes, the public narrative turned ugly. Business journals ran stories questioning her ethics. Financial blogs accused her of cutting corners. Anonymous sources claimed she'd been running schemes for years. It was all lies. But lies spread faster than truth. Sharon's phone stopped ringing. Clients pulled their accounts. Former allies suddenly had other commitments. The loneliness was suffocating. One evening, she sat in her empty office after everyone had gone home, staring at a photo on her desk. It was a picture of her and her grandmother, taken decades ago at Sharon's college graduation. Her grandmother had passed away years ago, but Sharon could still hear her voice. "You belong here, baby. Don't you ever forget that." Sharon wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't going to forget. Then quietly, Sharon made her move. She announced that she was stepping back from day-to-day operations. She appointed a temporary executive to run the firm while she focused on her health. The executive she chose was Brian Kellerman, a well-meaning but inexperienced manager who'd worked under her for years. He was competent enough to keep the lights on, but he wasn't a strategist. He wasn't a fighter. He was, for all practical purposes, a placeholder, a dummy. And that was exactly what Sharon needed. Because while Brian became the public face of the firm, the visible target of scrutiny, Sharon worked in the shadows. She consulted with legal experts. She met with compliance auditors. She traced the digital footprints of the false trades back to their source. And slowly, carefully, she began to see the full picture. Her enemies had made one critical mistake. They assumed she would react like most people do under pressure. They assumed she would fight back loudly, messily, emotionally. They never imagined she would stay calm, stay patient, stay strategic. Sharon used her knowledge of exclusion clauses in her insurance policies to anticipate how her enemies might overstep legal boundaries. She studied every move they made, documenting everything, building her case brick by brick. She reminded her small inner circle, the few people who still believed in her, that insurance wasn't just about money. It was about having the resources to stand strong when the world tried to knock you down. "We're not panicking," she told them during a late-night strategy session. "We're preparing." Alone at night, Sharon sometimes questioned herself, not her intelligence, not her skills, but her worth. She'd spent her entire career being underestimated, being overlooked, being told in 1,000 subtle ways that she didn't quite belong in the rooms where decisions were made. And now, in the middle of the biggest fight of her life, those old doubts crept back in. Was she fooling herself? Was she really strong enough to survive this? She'd sit by her window, looking out at the Miami skyline, and repeat a quiet belief to herself like a prayer. Integrity outlives noise. It was the only thing keeping her going. Weeks have passed, then months. The investigation dragged on. The media moved on to other stories. Sharon's name faded from the headlines. Most people assumed she was finished, but Sharon Mitchell was just getting started. And when the truth finally came to light, her enemies would realize they'd made the biggest mistake of their careers. They'd underestimated her. The financial world loves myths, get-rich-quick schemes, overnight success stories, the idea that if you're smart enough or ruthless enough, you can bend the rules and come out on top. Sharon had watched these myths destroy careers for decades. She'd seen brilliant people lose everything because they believed intelligence meant taking shortcuts. They confused aggression with strategy, but Sharon understood something her enemies didn't. True intelligence is patience. While her rivals celebrated what they thought was her downfall, Sharon was studying them. She knew exactly who was behind the false trades: Richard Crane and his hedge fund, Apex Capital Partners. Richard was everything Sharon wasn't: loud, flashy, connected to all the right people. He'd built his reputation on aggressive trading strategies and media-friendly wins. He'd also built it on corners cut when no one was looking. Richard tried to buy Sharon's firm 3 years ago. He'd offered her what he called a generous deal, but Sharon had seen right through it. He didn't want her clients. He wanted her client list so he could strip mine their portfolios for quick profits. She'd turned him down, and Richard Crane wasn't used to hearing no, so he'd decided to destroy her instead. The false trades, the planted evidence, the anonymous tips to regulators all led back to him and his team. They'd been careful, covering their tracks, using shell companies and offshore accounts to hide their involvement. But they'd made one critical error. They assumed Sharon would crumble before anyone could investigate deeply enough to find them. They assumed they were wrong. While Brian Kellerman played the role of acting CEO, fielding questions from clients and regulators, Sharon operated completely off the radar. She'd set up a temporary office in a small co-working space in Coral Gables, far from her usual haunts. She wore jeans and simple blouses instead of her usual tailored suits. She kept her head down and did her work quietly. No one recognized her. No one bothered her. It was perfect. She spent her days meeting with forensic accountants who traced every digital footprint of the fraudulent trades. She worked with compliance experts who documented every regulatory violation her enemies had committed while trying to frame her. And she used her deep knowledge of financial regulations, particularly grace period clauses and waiver of premium clauses in her insurance policies. to keep her firm operational during the investigation. Most people didn't understand how powerful these protections could be. Sharon did. When cash flow got tight during the investigation, she leveraged the grace periods in her policies to delay payments without losing coverage. When business stress became overwhelming, she activated waiver of premium clauses that kept her insurance active even when she couldn't pay immediately. Insurance isn't about fear, she reminded herself again and again. It's about dignity during disruption. These weren't tricks. They weren't shortcuts. They were legitimate protections she'd put in place years ago, back when people told her she was being too cautious. Now that caution was saving her life. The identity swap worked better than Sharon had hoped. With Brian as the visible face of the firm, Richard Crane and his team assumed they'd win. They watched Brian stumble through press conferences and client meetings, and they celebrated. They stopped being careful. That was their second mistake. Because while they relaxed, Sharon's team of investigators was documenting everything. Every suspicious trade, every hidden account, every communication proved Richard had orchestrated the entire scheme. Sharon sat in her small temporary office one afternoon, reviewing a thick binder of evidence, and allowed herself a small, grim smile. "They think the game is over," she whispered to herself. "They have no idea it's just beginning." But even as Sharon built her case, there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with doubts. What if she was wrong? What if the evidence wasn't strong enough? What if the system protected Richard because he was powerful and connected, and she was just Sharon? She'd think about all the times she'd been underestimated. The client meetings where men talked over her, the conferences where she was the only black woman in the room, the subtle, constant message that she didn't quite belong, and she'd wonder if maybe they were right. But then she'd remember her grandmother's voice. "You got iron in your bones, baby." Sharon would take a deep breath, get out of bed, and go back to work. 3 months into the investigation, Sharon got the break she'd been waiting for. One of Richard's employees, a junior analyst named Kevin Torres, reached out to her attorney with information. Kevin had been part of the team that planted the false trades. But unlike his bosses, Kevin had a conscience, and he'd kept records, emails, internal memos, screenshots of conversations where Richard explicitly ordered the scheme. Kevin didn't want to be part of destroying an innocent woman's career, so he decided to come forward. When Sharon's attorney brought her the evidence, she sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then she started to cry. Not from sadness, from relief. She finally had proof, ironclad, undeniable proof. The next step was critical. Sharon had to get this evidence in front of the right people without tipping off Richard's team. So she worked with her attorney to quietly approach the Securities and Exchange Commission. They provided the evidence along with a detailed timeline of the entire scheme. The SEC launched a formal investigation. Richard Crane had no idea until federal agents showed up at his office with a warrant. The day the news broke, Sharon was sitting in her temporary office, drinking coffee and reading through client emails, when Elaine called her, screaming, "Sharon, turn on the news! Turn it on right now!" Sharon grabbed her laptop and pulled up a news site. The headline stopped her cold. Hedge fund CEO Richard Crane arrested on fraud charges. Scheme to frame competitor exposed. Sharon's hands shook as she read the article. Federal investigators had raided Apex Capital Partners. Richard and 3 of his senior executives were in custody. The evidence showed a clear pattern of market manipulation, fraud, and conspiracy to destroy a competitor. Sharon Mitchell's name was cleared. Publicly. Completely. Unequivocally. That evening, Sharon drove back to her real office for the first time in months. She walked through the empty halls, her footsteps echoing on the polished floors. She stood in her old office looking out at Biscayne Bay as the sun set over the water. Her phone started ringing. Clients are calling to apologize. Business partners reach out to reconnect. Media outlets are requesting interviews. Sharon didn't answer any of them, not yet. She just stood there, breathing, letting the reality sink in. She'd won. Not through aggression, not through shortcuts, not through manipulation, through patience, through preparation, through ethics, and through understanding that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about knowing how to stand back up when everyone assumes you're finished. When Sharon finally stepped back into the public eye, she did so on her own terms. She didn't hold a triumphant press conference. She didn't gloat or attack her enemies. She simply invited her clients to a small gathering at her office, where she thanked them for their patience and explained what had happened. "I know the last few months have been difficult," she said, standing in front of a room full of people who doubted her, then believed in her again. "But I want you to know that every step I took was to protect you and your investments. That's what I've always done, and it's what I'll continue to do." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, then another person, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, applauding. Sharon felt tears pricking her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd earned this. In the weeks that followed, Sharon used her newfound visibility to talk about things most financial advisors avoided: the importance of critical illness insurance, the necessity of understanding inflation protection clauses in long-term policies, and the power of renewal clauses in insurance and in life. "People think insurance is boring," she said during an interview with a business magazine. "But insurance is what keeps you standing when life tries to knock you down. It's not about fear, it's about freedom." Her firm regained its clients. New clients came knocking. Her reputation was stronger than ever. But more importantly, Sharon felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. 6 months after Richard Crane's arrest, Sharon received a letter. It was from Kevin Torres, the analyst who'd blown the whistle. In the letter, Kevin thanked her for giving him the courage to do the right thing. He explained that he'd been terrified of Richard and his team, but seeing Sharon's quiet strength had inspired him to come forward. "You showed me," Kevin wrote, "that integrity isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing a person can have." Sharon folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her desk drawer. She thought about all the people who'd underestimated her over the years, all the time she'd been told she wasn't enough, and she realized something profound. They were never judging her. They were revealing themselves. As for Richard Crane, he faced federal charges. His hedge fund collapsed. His reputation was destroyed. He'd spent his entire career believing that power and connections could protect him from consequences. He learned too late that they couldn't. 1 year after the investigation began, Sharon stood once again in her office, looking out at Biscayne Bay. The water was calm. The sky was clear. The city hummed with life below her. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about all the women who'd come before her, who'd fought battles no one remembered, who'd stood strong when the world tried to break them. And she whispered, "I hope I made you proud." Sharon Mitchell didn't win by manipulation. She won by preparation, by understanding that ethical systems don't make you weak, they make you unbreakable. Knowing that smart planning, including insurance, isn't fear-driven, it's future-driven. By recognizing that patience outlasts noise and integrity outlives deceit. Her story is a reminder that when powerful people bet against you, the best revenge isn't anger, it's survival. It's standing tall when they expect you to fall. It's proving that underestimating someone says more about them than it ever could about you. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated in business or in life? Have you ever felt like the world was betting against you? Not because you weren't capable, but because they simply didn't see your worth? If so, I want you to remember Sharon's story. I want you to remember that preparation isn't paranoia. Protection isn't weakness, and patience isn't passive. The safeguards you put in place today, financial, legal, emotional, are the things that will carry you through the storms you can't yet see coming. What safeguards have helped you survive uncertain seasons? Have you had moments where the right insurance policy, the right legal document, or the right support system saved you when everything else was falling apart? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and share your experience. Because when we share our stories, we help each other see that we're not alone. We're all fighting battles. We're all building futures. And we're all capable of more than the world gives us credit for. And if this story inspired you, if Sharon's journey reminded you of your own strength, please hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to sharing motivational, ethical business stories rooted in real-world wisdom, stories about people who refuse to give up, stories about the power of preparation, integrity, and quiet determination. Because the world needs more stories like Sharon Mitchell's, stories that remind us you don't need to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest. You don't need to manipulate or deceive to win. You just need to prepare, protect yourself, and stand firm in who you are. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Now go out there and show the world what you're made of. Because just like Sharon, you've got iron in your bones, and nobody can take that away from you.